So on my study for UOP on teacher impact of COVID, when we were talking about it last month, I mentioned that I was planning on doing data collection online, and people were curious about how that works when you're doing paid data collection, because some of the other members were having challenges with data collection being slow for their studies. And so I said I'd share. And so that's what this presentation is me sharing what I've learned in my data collection, which I just finished and wrapped up yesterday. So hopefully me sharing of what I learned is helpful to you. And I also did a little extra quality control for some extra analysis to give you guys some extra data. So when we talked before, we were talking about SurveyMonkey and how some of them can be very expensive. Sometimes they want like 5, 7, a lot of money per person. I've looked at one called User Interviews that wants up to $80 plus giving the person a incentive on top of that for interviews. So sometimes you look at those numbers and you're like, no, it's not affordable, right, to do this online data collection method. I'm just going to go, snowball manual method. So I'm here to show you how I was able to, hopefully successfully, based on my data, use an alternative lower cost online collection method. So I'm going to cover why I think it's helpful for us as researchers, how much it costs, how much time extra it might take me, and how I use the system I use, which is called MTurk. Concerns regarding data and if it's good data, and some other resources if you don't like the MTurk one I use, and then questions if there's time for anybody to ask questions about what I did. So a month and a week of pleading with friends and people I know via Snowball, please take my survey, keeping in mind my survey has 85 questions, so it's a little bit on the long side. I netted a total of 0. 0 respondents responded to my pleas for taking the survey. And that includes, I believe I did a post, or at least I submitted a post to our blog here at UOP. Crickets responded. So thankfully, I had included in IRB using paid survey data collection. With paid survey data collection, I ended up collecting a total of 565 respondents. Of those, after sorting through and canceling out who didn't pass the screener, so they opened the survey technically, but when they were asked, the consent and or the screener questions, are you over 18, et cetera, they screened out for whatever reason. There were 326. So in the same amount of data where I got 0 from snowballing and begging and pleading, with my paid data collection, I was able to get 326, which is adequate for the study design that I'm trying to do. So how did I do that? So I did it with what's called MTurk, Amazon MTurk, but I didn't do it directly with Amazon MTurk. I used a company that was built to help unsophisticated, non-technical researchers use MTurk, which is a company called Cloud Research, which was started by scientists who had the same problem, but thought MTurk was a little clunky, so they built MTurk, or the MTurk toolkit to help. So using that, I was able to collect all that data. Now, within that, some people asked last time when we met, and I hadn't thought about doing it, but I was able to add that as an option to compare. They said, well, are you screening specifically, are you paying extra just for educators or teachers, right? And I said, well, no, because that would cost me a lot of extra money to try and do only teachers. And the name of the survey and the description, everything says all over it. Are you a teacher? Are you a teacher? Survey is just for teachers, right? So they shouldn't even click on it if they're not a teacher, because it says teacher, right? 3-4 times, right, before you even open the survey. But I said, well, I'm willing to pay a little bit of extra to compare and see if there's any value in actually using that subcategorization within these paid surveys in terms of the data that's collected. So I did cross compare. You can see the total responses I got from both those methods. Doing the educator only took me a lot longer, to get a lot fewer results, and cost me a lot more per response, right? So on the face of it, it's definitely more expensive, right? But is it any better, right? In terms of the data quality or whatever. In terms of that, I'll go in that a little bit. But let's talk about the time. So in terms of the time that this might take, right, it did take some significant time, right? I had to set up the survey, and because I wanted to do this cross comparison, I had to make multiple copies of my survey, right? So I could do one for the paid and one for the not paid and one for the paid who are the educators, so I could do these cross comparisons easily. Plus, I had to go back and forth with IRB extra because I had to add all these extra features and things. So maybe it's a little more complicated on the IRB side. Plus, you have to set up MTurk and do that part. And then you also have to do the approvals, because in this, there's like a manual approval process in what I did that I'll explain. So there is a bunch of time involved in that. At the same time, the question would be, how does this compare to how much time it takes you manually to harass people or try and get them to take a survey manually, and like the opportunity cost. If it takes you a year to collect your data versus a week or 2 weeks, right, or a month maybe, that extra time can cost a lot. For example, with my dissertation, I ended up adding IRB to my IRB that I wanted to do paid data collection, and I estimate that this is going to save me several semesters worth of time in terms of like paying tuition just while saying, yes, I'm still collecting data. Yes, I'm still collecting data. If I wasn't paying for the survey collection to be paid for with MTurk, and that cost is actually cheaper than I would have been paying in tuition fees, right? Just to pay for the MTurk users to pay. So that's something I think that should be considered. In terms of, is the data quality and is it worth it? One of the benefits of using cloud research versus using just going to MTurk or using some other platform is because it was designed for researchers and by researchers, they think about these things, right? They know you're going to have to defend this in your paper, and you're going to need some kind of way to think about how you're going to do that. So they do a number of things, and they could go into far more detail, but I kind of highlighted some of them here on the screen. But they keep track of the participants, and they block people, and then people who have successfully not been blocked and have been shown as being good in the past, they have a separate pool for that. And then they also look at where you say you're from and confirm that you're really there, so that someone isn't telling me that they're in the United States, but they're really in India, right? And so I'm paying someone who actually doesn't match my participant pool because they're lying just to try and do the paid survey. So they do a lot of things to help protect me from that without me having to know any of that technical stuff on how to do it, but I can still cite the data on their website and cite their page in terms of including that in my publication when I publish. In terms of the actual trustworthiness tests that I did extra to try and see if I could dig deeper on whether or not I could tell if there was any benefit, or if people who said they were educators were maybe more trustworthy. Initially, I thought screening for educators only was a bad idea, because when you can only choose one drop down from a list, right? How many of us are multitasking, right? Maybe you're an educator, right? But also, doing some other kind of job, right? So which bucket did you pick, right? So in some ways I was concerned saying educators only would have been over screening, right? So I didn't originally screen for educators. I did the screening through the title and the description and the consent form, which all say teacher, 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 right? So, but a couple things that I looked into in terms of trustworthiness tests that I saw in the literature for checking for bias and validity and stuff was, time taken, right? So I looked at the time taken between those who were not teachers versus those who were teachers, right? Now remember that the ones who were not teachers, specifically this MTurk Cloud Research bigger batch, the average time and the median time, it's a little bit greater spread, but it also is there was a lot more of them. There's I collected more people in that group versus the educators only. But the median time is pretty close until we get up to $1. It looks like if I actually pay a teacher $1 versus 50 cents, maybe they spend a little bit more time on each question, right? Because the median time goes up to very, very close to the average time. Everyone's spending about the same amount of time. And this was across, I think, 53 people or 43 people in this group that were paid $1 per survey. Then they're maybe they're spending a little extra time, thinking about each of the questions. And then one thing to look at is this completion rate. So the completion rate doesn't mean that they're lower quality. What it means is they clicked on the link and they just really weren't paying attention, even though they should have, to the description. It says teacher, right? And so they didn't complete, because when it said, are you a teacher? They said no. And I said, you're disqualified. You did not complete, right? But because the disqualification happened there and I had a lower completion rate, then I only was charged 71 cents per survey, instead of building in the completion rate in the, by screening for educators only. Then I have a higher completion rate, 64 completed. Maybe the other 20-30% might have been oh, it's too long, or whatever the reasons they had for not completing. But then the average rate goes up almost double, right? Because 142 would be double. It's almost double the cost, right, to say I want teachers only, right? And then if I say, okay, I want teachers only, and I'll pay you a little bit extra just to see if, more money equals better quality or something, right? Doubling the amount of money paid from 50 cents to $1, which was in my IRB for me to be able to do that. I did write that in. Increased my cost, obviously, significantly. It didn't happen faster. It took me just as long to collect this second batch, 10 days, as it did to collect this first batch of 50 cents. So it did not save me any time in the data collection to pay them more, though possibly there may be some better quality. However, it could also, just because these are small numbers, this was like 43 people versus 53 people, it could just be, the law of averages of these numbers are relatively close, because the median time is still, within a minute of each other, how long they were taking reading all the questions and stuff. So I haven't dug into like the literature exactly on how well I would argue or validate that, but that's the interesting factors for you to consider and think about, and how you would argue or explain that, or which method you might want to use if you were going to use paid data collection. And then how do you actually do it? So maybe you're thinking, well, maybe I'll try it, or maybe I'll just do like a little mini test, and you're like, well, how would I do it anyway? So you would first need to add to your design, making an additional variable that is the way that they say that they get paid. So you add an extra variable at the end of the survey, which is a numerical variable that validates completion. And everything I've read on reducing faking in online surveys says, don't make it just one word, because if you just write congratulations and everybody who finishes writes congratulations, it's easy for some of these people to go online and like look up easy completion codes, and then they'll just pop that in and not actually do the survey at all, right? So what I did was I used the SurveyMonkey A/B test feature, where you randomly are given one of 10 codes. So then they have to get one of these 10 codes. And we actually had a couple people who did not put in the right number, right code, but only a very small number, like 2 or 4 or something. It was a very small number that put in a bad code or didn't put in a code at all. But this is how I did that part. So you add that on the front end in the study design, and then there's just a few setup steps. You set up the MTurk requester account, so that's with Amazon directly, to be able to request what's called like a gig or a hit, for someone to take your gig or a hit. And then you go in, you set up a Cloud Research account on Cloud Research's platform. And then once you've made that survey on SurveyMonkey or elsewhere, in Cloud Research, you use their template to set up the gig. And then when you set it up and you tell them how you want to do it, right? If you tell them you want to do the educated only versus not the educated only, they'll tell you how much money you need to fund and how much of it needs to be sent to on your Amazon account for Amazon to pay the requesters directly, and how much is for Cloud Research for them to do the extra screening and work on your participant pool. And then you fund accounts, and then you hit start, and then it starts your data collection, and then you get email responses telling you, hey, your data is completed if it's completed, or with other notifications, and that's it. And then at the end, you just log on and you review those responses to see that they put in a valid code and accept them, which says, okay, they're valid, go ahead and pay them. And then they get paid, and you never see them. So this is what it looks like. So when I log in, there's a worker ID, and they each have like some weird random number, which is a worker ID. So I have no way of knowing who this worker is based on this worker ID. And then I see the secret key they put in, and I validate, was this one of my actual real secret keys? One of my 10. Yes, it was. Okay, I'll go ahead and approve it. So if I could approve and then save it, then they pay them. So that handles all the money for me. I never had to know them. The anonymity is kept, the whole way through. That's what it looks like. What I did learn, though, is that they have a connector that connects with Qualtrics. And Qualtrics is expensive, so I haven't done it. But I looked it up, and Qualtrics has a free account you can use if you want less than 250 respondents to your survey. So potentially, rather than having to do this manual process of the secret key and everything, if you need less respondents, you could connect with Qualtrics and use their method, and then they kind of auto-generate that key for you, and you don't have to go in there and do that part manually, because they have like a sync going on with Qualtrics where they do it automatically. And then other things I thought of is, like I said, first of all, with my tests with the teachers versus the non-teachers, I think it was a lot more affordable and to do the screening questions rather than paying extra to screen the participants. But that if you have a survey where you're worried about faking, you can also add additional questions or other ways to check for further validity in the faking side of things. As I mentioned, this is not obviously the only way. This just happens to be the way that I used and that I think is the more affordable option, but there are other options. Specifically, some people do qualitative studies, and you're like, I'm trying to interview people, but I can't find enough people to interview. I've talked to this company called User Interviews, and they'll give you the first 3 free, and they'll help you find and connect you with people to interview. And normally, for like a business person, like to connect you with a professional, they normally charge you like $80 plus. You have to give them something, but they'll do free because they're trying to like encourage their build out or whatever. And if I refer you, I'll get 3 free too. Woo! So anyway, that's something if you're trying to do like qualitative interviews versus surveys. And then there's also SurveyMonkey, and some platforms like SurveyMonkey have like a paid method. And technically, even cloud research, if you had money to throw at them, they'll do all the research for you. They'll be like your free research intern and do all of it, all this work and everything for you, if you had the funds to throw at that. So lots of other options, but just want to encourage you to consider the viability of using paid methods to collect your data so you can get your research done and get published faster. And that's it. Questions? Oh, and then I do have my references. Cloud Research, like I said, it's published by researchers. They're like, hey, share our citation. That's their citation. There you go.
Thank you so much, Alice. This is a lot of information to process. I somehow, when you mentioned qualtrics or something, I remember somebody talked about it, but it was gone. I totally forgot it. But I have nothing to say except thank you for sharing all that. And what about others in the meeting here? Comments, questions? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
Okay, this is Dr. Temple. I think that this is revolutionary. I want to give you the highest accolades for sharing. This is going to take 2 years off of research, dissertations, and it's just a total new way to get participants. I just want to thank you so much for sharing this information.
Cool. On that note, Dr. Gwendolyn, one thought that I had, especially when going through my own IRB process and what a pain it is, right? Because I feel like, first of all, I want to congratulate Phoenix because compared to the other school, which I shall not name at this minute, and their speed, the IRB at UOP has been exceptionally fast in responding in general, so that's just amazing to begin with. But even so, the headache of trying to figure out how to write the procedures in a way that IRB is going to like when it comes to adding that paid method, right? Because you basically have to do everything double, right? They want to see a different copy of your survey, right? Even though you're adding one question, it's just one extra question at the end, but you have to have a whole different copy. And the changes you have to make on the consent, because you're on the version that people who are paid versus unpaid see, it's a lot of extra like mental agony, and I really don't want that extra agony to be a hurdle for someone completing their doctorate. So I would love to, if there was a way that we could maybe use some of my like examples that I did for UOP, like for my IRB, right? To maybe like help make a template, right? So if you want to use MTurk, or want to do paid data collection, right? For a survey, because I did a survey method, so it wouldn't necessarily be applicable for anything else, but for a survey, online data collection method, if there was a way where we could make a template, and then with a student who wants to use that, they could start with that kind of a template in terms of like the steps, right? To massage into how they write their IRB to save them a lot of extra stress and hassle on that back and forth work, especially some of the chairs don't even know, if they haven't worked with it either, right? So to help with everyone involved, I think if we could make some kind of template, maybe that would also help with, like you said, with shaving time off dissertations.
Thank you, Alice, and thank you, Dr. Temple. And Dr. Gwendolyn, yes?
Yes, first let me start by saying I think Dr. Temple is an upgrade to me. And secondly, my question is, my question is, can we engage this MTurk entity related to getting restricted data, and do they test the analysis in both SPSS as well as SAS or STATA or some of the other methods out there, or do you know, Dr. Alice?
So I did my data collection using, so the data collection is my own instrument, so it's my survey on SurveyMonkey. So I use SurveyMonkey. Like I said, they do also work with Qualtrics and have a better connection with Qualtrics if you need under 250 and can use their free or want to pay for their paid. But I went with a paid SurveyMonkey because the student pricing with SurveyMonkey was I thought a better fit. But since I'm using SurveyMonkey for collecting my data, I can download it in SPSS. But even on SurveyMonkey's online platform, before downloading it, while I'm evaluating the data, I'm able to do a lot of filtering to identify some of the quality things in my data. So for example, on another study that I'm doing with SurveyMonkey, I always start by filtering out, the people who didn't pass the qualifying questions, right? So that's when I'm able to see, like I showed on one of my slides, let's say 300 total clicked in, but only 200 completed, right? So I can do that in SurveyMonkey without even having to spend the extra time to import it into SPSS. So I think it's a big time saver on the front end, just to know how many real people you have before you get all excited about your data, right? Like you normally would if you were just doing a plain survey or something. And then from there, then you can do a few other analyses, and it does have some basic rudimentary statistics that you can do online also before you download it, if you want to play with that too. So in terms of restricted data, I'm not sure what you mean by restricted data if it does that with you. Do you mean like a restricted population, or do you mean in terms of limited access to the data itself?
Limited access to the data itself, because I'm working with a government agency right now related to restricted data, and they only do SAS and STATA, not SPSS. And so my statistician that I have is only adept in SPSS. And so we're having to look for someone to go in and get the restricted data, get it in a format that can be then put into SPSS. That's why I was asking the question.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I've used data with and someone else I was tutoring, but I'm more trained in SPSS myself as well. I use SurveyMonkey to collect my data. And that was my choice. I could have used a different platform to collect my data for this method. And I didn't even check if SPSS downloads to Stata, but it does download to SPSS. That's one of the reasons why I chose it, and on purpose, because I wanted to save myself the headache. So I think the answer to that question is yes, but at the same time, it sounds like you're actually getting data from an existing pool of data, not collecting new data. And this is more about collecting new data rather than reformatting an existing data.
Excellent. Thank you for your response.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. And again, I'm so grateful, Alice, that you've taken the time to put this together and share it with us.